Valley didn't just vote us out, they signed their own reckoning. Commander Gavin Holt's words sliced through the command deck like a wire drawn too tight. His gloved hands hovered above the navigational console, knuckles pale from restraint. Around him, the bridge of solar aegis was lit in tones of scarlet and muted blue, screens humming quietly with tactical overlays. No alarms yet. But everyone aboard the ship felt it, the pressure of unseen decisions tightening like a noose. Admiral Korath Jern didn't look up. He stood near the viewport, eyes fixed on the feed from Dexara's orbital chamber as it played out across the primary display. Dozens of council delegates, some scaled, others veined with luminescent stripes, had just returned to their pods after casting the vote. The chamber's circular table dimmed as the final tally solidified in Zorathian glyphs, then converted to Terran script. 8712 expulsion confirmed. Jern didn't flinch. He'd expected betrayal. He just hadn't expected it to be applauded. Replay Valthor's motion, he said flatly. The ship's VI rewound the feed. High Executor Valthor appeared again, tall, insectoid, adorned with ceremonial neck speens and gold sensory rings that shimmered under the chamber lights. Let it be known, Valthor hissed, mandibles curling with satisfaction, that Earth has refused the trade recalibration. A coalition that undermines shared stability must no longer benefit from Concord protections. This measure ensures order. The moment replayed with clinical detachment, but Holt's fist came down hard on the edge of the terminal, rattling the nearby systems. Order, Holt spat. They're calling extortion a peacekeeping measure? Still silent, Jern turned toward the rest of his crew. The command deck, normally humming with report exchanges, had gone rigid. Not out of fear, not yet. More like mourning before a storm. Cut the feed, Jern ordered. Relay to Commodore Vask, begin silent protocol. Holt blinked. Silent protocol? You want us, Dark? Jern's gaze was unreadable, but the lines near his eyes had deepened. They've chosen to isolate Earth. We'll let them taste what that actually means. A junior officer stepped forward, a bead of sweat trailing from his temple. Sir, transmission incoming from Prime Command. They're requesting immediate response to the vote. Route it to my station. Jern crossed the deck to his private chamber. As the door sealed behind him, the air changed. Thicker, heavier. Not because of pressure, but because of what was about to be severed. He approached his heads-up display, which flickered on with a command. Prime Command's senior council appeared. 7 Terran commanders, all visibly worn. High Chair Dalen spoke first, his voice gravelly with urgency. Admiral Jern, the Council's action is legally binding. Zorathian patrols have already seized 3 freighters near Proximus drift routes. We need immediate guidance. Jern didn't speak. He stared at the display, every wrinkle in his forehead etched with quiet calculation. Another voice interrupted, General Voss, his tone strained. We're hearing movement near Gliza, 17 Conquered destroyers redirected from staging positions. If they're preparing for enforcement, VIP Jern cut in, eyes hardening. Blockade within 96 hours. They'll wrap Saul's throat with gunships and call it a security maneuver. Stalin exhaled. Then we need to respond, now, before we lose control of the colonies. Jern leaned in slightly, voice even. We already lost control the moment Earth voted for independence in a room built to punish autonomy. The only move left is not to play their game. Admiral, Voss growled, we're facing a coordinated resource denial operation. Civilians are already rationing food and power in 2 outposts. If we don't retaliate, Aaron's hand sliced downward, silencing the panel with a single gesture. The display flickered once and shut down. Back on the bridge, Holt turned as the door slid open again. Jern re-entered without breaking stride. Orders, sir? Jern approached the central map, a full 3D display of Sol and its surrounding systems, now littered with red markers. Patrol units. Drones. Frigate formations closing in, like ants on spilled sugar. Behold course, no weapons discharge unless fired upon. Monitor all outer system traffic. Alert Commodore Vask. Begin drift spread of recon boys. I want Sol watched from every angle. Holt's brow twitched. You're still waiting, still giving them the benefit of action. They're not ready for what happens if we act first, Jern said. Let them tighten the noose. Let them believe we're inert. One of the lieutenants, Perrin, a sharp-eyed tactical analyst, chimed in from his station. Admiral, Concord ships just initiated docking lockdowns on Terran embassies. Zarathian encryption layers added. No outgoing signals allowed. Blockade doctoring in full swing, Holt muttered. Jern's voice remained quiet, but the steel in it was unmistakable. Then make sure every ship in our fleet goes cold. Full, silent running. Let them stare into empty space and wonder where the real fire is. The bridge went still. A low throb of magnetic clamps shifting their status was the only audible response as crew began executing the blackout commands. Holt approached, slower now. We've got 2 weeks before our Proxima supply chains fail entirely. Colonies won't survive on phantom pride, Admiral. Jern finally turned to him. His right eye was bloodshot. He hadn't slept in 2 days. And there was a tremor in his left hand. Still, his voice didn't shake. Do you think they voted us out because we were weak? Holt hesitated. They voted us out because we didn't bend. Jern nodded. And now they expect a whimper. He stepped closer to the central panel, fingers dancing over inputs before pausing above a single encrypted relay, labeled SCN. Stellar Cascade Network. He didn't touch it. Not yet. But the message was clear. Let them watch the screen go black. Let their analysts scramble to fill silence with noise. When we return to the table, if we return, it won't be to speak. Behind him, the central feed showing the Concord chamber flickered again. One final message from Nexara. Membership revoked. Concord protections withdrawn. All trade nullified. Terran Union expelled. The signal cut mid-sentence. Screen went dark. No flare, no static. Just absence. Jern stared at the void for a long moment, then turned away. When the first freighter vanished, no alarms went off. It was a cargo hauler out of the Vega Terra line, 620 meters long, running a low-visibility route through the outer grid. Nothing worth noticing on a regular day. But that day wasn't regular, and the disappearance wasn't quiet. The crew's last status ping was time-stamped 6 minutes before contact broke. After that, dead channels, empty lanes, no wreckage. The patrol logs from Zarathian ships in the area were conveniently wiped. Admiral Korath Jern watched the report scroll across his data console with one hand clenched around a stim capsule. He didn't activate it. Not yet. His eyes moved slowly over the columns. Projected food shortages, medical stock instability, protest probability ratings in Proxima and EOS. The numbers weren't red. They were bleeding. Commander Holt stood beside the tactical panel, jaw tight, adjusting the satellite render of Eridani's shipping corridor. Several lanes blinked yellow, unconfirmed routes. 2 glowed red. He didn't bother with commentary. The data spoke for itself. We've lost 5 cargo vessels in 30 hours, he said finally. 3 intercepted by Concord Binglet patrols. 1 disabled near the Vorth Pass. Boarded. Last was erased. Signal ended mid-packet. Jern turned his head slightly. Civilian? Confirmed. Commercial vessel. 22 personnel. All Terran-born. Jern pressed a finger against the side of his temple, not rubbing, just anchoring himself. Send coded notice to their families. Use classified diplomatic strike status as the reason for delay. Holt nodded grimly. Already in motion. EarthGov's morale division is triaging news cycles, trying to keep panic localized. But it's spreading. On the wall, the live feed from Earth's internal media grid flickered. Screams echoed from a barricade clash outside the Terran assembly building. Rioters in worn jackets and utility harnesses, throwing fragments of recycled plating at riot drones. Smoke climbed past shattered solar towers, drifting across district banners as the cameras zoomed out. They're blaming us, Holt said under his breath. They think we've gone quiet out of fear. They're not wrong to be angry, Jern replied, But they're wrong about fear. In the far corner, Operations Officer Cyril stepped forward, sweat beading at his hairline. Admiral, food logistics on Proxima Colony have entered orange tier rationing. Civil authority is requesting priority escort for cargo runs. Jern shook his head, denied. Cyril hesitated. They won't hold. They'll adapt. Jern moved to the operations map and zoomed in. The conquered fleet's formation around Nexara hadn't shifted. 4,000 ships. All arranged like teeth in a grin that never changed expression. They're waiting, Jern murmured. Waiting for us to lunge, or fold. They won't give us 96 hours, Holt muttered. They don't need to, Jern replied, which is why we take them off the clock. He motioned Holt over and keyed into a secondary station, locked under a triple code. The screen buzzed and a prompt lit up. Cascade stir. Authorization pending. Holt blinked. You're opening the bluff? Jern's expression didn't change. They want us exposed. They'll get a scattered force, harmless, unfocused, just enough to bait their judgment. Holt hesitated. These patrols are armed. We'll lose people. We lose more if we look frozen. There was a moment, brief, sharp, when the reality of the order crossed Holt's face. He gave a sharp nod and keyed the activation. Across the fleet, encrypted relays transmitted orders to 17 scatter groups. Frigates, corvettes, and recon units hidden in the lunar shadow or buried in the gas streams of Saturn's outer edges. Within minutes, Terran strike teams moved, not in waves but in scattered bursts, uncoordinated by design. The first to strike was Tarsus Blade, a short-range interceptor near the Electon belt. It swept through a Conqueror listening drone's blind spot, severing its tether relay with a modified impact charge, then vanished into the magnetic field. No retaliation, no acknowledgement. But the Conqueror logs would record a breach. By the fourth hour, 3 Zorathian patrol frigates had been nudged off course by ship-level magnetic bursts. Nothing catastrophic, nothing openly aggressive. But the pattern emerged. Mild interference, strategic nudges, signal corruption. They'll see it as posturing, Holt said, watching the real-time feed, but not coordinated. That's the point, Jern replied. They need to believe we're fractured, indecisive, while we give the drone yards enough breathing room. Data feeds flickered, pulsing with intercepted Concorde traffic. Words like intermittent resistance and disorganized Terran units danced across intercepted Zorathian channels. Concorde analysts were debating whether Earth's forces had fractured under diplomatic collapse. Meanwhile, solar EJs remained motionless above Saturn, its weapon systems powered down, shielding stable, signals clean. Not a single pulse suggested aggression. But in the war rooms below deck, ship captains plotted fake withdrawal arcs. Supply lines blinked in and out of formation to simulate confusion. 72 hours, Cyril said from behind his station. That's how much time our maneuvers have earned. It's not time, Jern corrected. It's noise, and they're trying to parse the wrong melody. On Earth, the situation worsened. Holt pulled up a new feed, Proximus Agra District 3, where protesters had broken through a food depot. The footage was raw. Children clutching nutrient blocks, older men pushing back drone enforcers with pipe tools and warehouse chain. The colony's civilian governor screamed into a radio uplink, voice shaking, "You left us to starve while they circle." Jern's face remained unreadable. "We didn't leave them," he said. "We stayed quiet. That's different." Holt spoke with strain now. To them, it's the same. A notification flicked across the secondary panel. Strike Group Red Hollow had lost contact. 9 Terran ships. Vanished. Over the Hellion Drift. Confirmed intercept, Cyril said. Zorathian reinforcement squad. Minimal warning. Casualties? All hands. Recovery unlikely. Jern's eyelid twitched. He didn't move, but the vein in his jaw stood out. "Log it," he said. "And rotate Cascade units to Vector 3. Begin distortion calibration for the final wave." "You think they'll spot it?" Holt asked quietly. "They'll believe it was retaliation for the losses," Jern answered, "which means they won't notice the grid rebalancing around Neptune." Across the bridge, everyone returned to their consoles. There was no talk of vengeance, no anger. Only sequence shifts, loadouts, feints. The screen showing the Concorde fleet near Nexera updated again, still unshifting. 4,000 ships, engines warm, weapons idle. Waiting. But back on Earth, red banners unfurled across public towers as local networks blacked out for 5-minute intervals, broadcast channels overridden with looping protests and screams. Trade collapses, desperation climbing. Jern finally took the stim capsule from his pocket and pressed it to the side of his neck. A hiss, and his breathing steadied. "We hold the line," he said, more to himself than anyone else. Alt stared at him. "Even if it breaks?" Jern looked back, voice cold. "It won't." Dr. Halbach's Torm stared through a fogged visor, blinking against the strobe of weld light bouncing off the inner chamber walls. His breath fogged the inner glass, stale from hours in a cracked environment suit held together with thermal tape and stubborn habit. Static danced around the edges of the feed, disrupted by radiation from the nearby flare burst. But that, too, had been part of the plan. The Kuiper arc was blanketed in solar noise. Nothing escaped, nothing entered clean. He pulled a rusted latch back with a grunt. Beneath it, a coiled core hissed as it rotated into the open slot. The internal grid of node C9 coughed alive with violet glow, powering a skeletal frame suspended in its build cradle. Torm lifted a small control ring to his temple, triggered a blink wit, and the sequence began. One by one, alloyed spines extended across the drone's chassis, magnetic couplers snapping with sharp thunks as support arms locked around the hull. Its layered plating was asymmetrical by design, meant to break standard targeting logic. Each frame bore thermal baffling, dust-filtered microthrusters, and a modular compartment along its spine for intelligence relays. Torm exhaled slowly. Cascade Node C operational, frame series 17 now in mass assembly. The reply came in clipped cadence, not from another engineer but from Solar Aegis, half a system away. Commander Gavrin Holt's voice crackled with static, smoothed by filters. "Confirm signal masking. Any drift from the solar flare distortion window?" "Within drift tolerances," Torm replied, nudging his left thumb against a reroute switch. "Radiation shadow is holding. They won't see what isn't on their map." In the flagship's command bay, Admiral Jern crossed behind Holt, eyes narrowing as the drone production tallies climbed across the vertical monitor. The count had already passed 3,000, with 15 yards still accelerating. Every drone carried swarm node compatibility, independent engagement parameters, and cluster sync support. "How long until they can form coordinated patterns?" Jern asked. "Full node link activation in 31 hours, Holt answered. "AI scaffolds have finished their calibration." Jern studied the schematics. Each drone was tagged with a serial identifier, ending in a dead code. Units not recognized by any Concorde system. They looked more like slivers of broken glass than ships. And they imitate multiple fleet signatures. "They won't just imitate," Holt said, his fingers tracing a line through the projected path near Neptune. "They'll create false vectors, mirrored gravitic traces, decoy accelerants. Concorde's analysts will be reading ghosts." Yaren leaned closer to the map. "Make them believe the ghosts are real?" Back in Node C, Torm stepped across a graded platform as another drone detached from its scaffolding and glided through the hangar's magnetic lane. Its hull scraped faintly along the guide rails, unfinished edges catching loose shavings. Torm squinted as the next line of drones rolled forward. 9 at once, angular, silent, and very much alive. He tapped a command pad on his wrist. "Node D, Node E, initiate lift sequence," he muttered. "Group staggered ignition. Keep emission profiles randomized. Echo with false manufacturing interference." Over the open channel, a low hum of alignment logs filtered in, each node confirming operational viability. Torm moved toward a reinforced observation panel and looked out. The view wasn't beautiful. It was industrial, harsh, lit only by forge pulse lines and navigational flickers. Dozens of drone shapes floated in orbital drift, unmanned, coordinated, watching nothing and everything. They'd been built for deception, not defense, not diplomacy. People were never part of the public arsenal, Torm said into the comms. You want to know why? Tell me, Jan responded. Because the Concord would have sanctioned us the day they found out. These aren't warships. They're instruments. You don't guide them, you wind them up and let them play their own tune. Bjorn didn't argue. He knew what Torm had meant. These drones didn't follow commands. They interpreted them. You gave them a structure, not instructions. They weren't weapons, they were tactics encoded in steel. Relay to yard command, Bjorn said, turning to Holt. Reassign drone lot 9 to fake capital signatures. I want them leading the slingshot pattern. Holt typed rapidly into the command console. Speed modulation will keep them aligned, but they'll burn hard. That orbit isn't kind. They only need to be seen. Holt glanced over his shoulder. You think the Concord will believe it? Billy won't have time not to. Far beyond, on the fringe of Neptune's gravity well, a secondary staging area began to activate. Torm's final engineering gambit, Cascade Phantom Array, was a decoupled ring of thermal regulators and signal projectors designed to amplify swarm emissions. It wasn't a fleet. It just looked like one. Combined with the drones, it would project false telemetry suggesting more than 20,000 combat vessels entering Concord territory. Torm said, Telemetry won't be able to track the origin, Torm said. Telemetry will look layered, corrupted, like overlapping fleets. Their command centers will scramble just trying to decipher the pattern. And during that scramble, Holt added, we arrive. Jern folded his arms. The longer they hesitate, the closer we get. Every maneuver had to buy time. Every fake signal, every ghost signature. It all had to pull at the Concord's reflexes just enough to force miscalculation, delay their timing, muddle their defense formations, mislead their data systems. This was not a war of brute force. It was a war of perception. In the final sequence of Node C's manifest, the last drone frame snapped into place. Torm walked to the edge of the catwalk, watching it rise. His hands tightened into fists. He'd worked for 19 years on this project, long after it had been officially canceled. Deep beneath systems no longer shone on any navmart. Now they were rising, all of them. Admiral, he said, voice slower, lower. If this fails, it won't, Jern said. I don't gamble. Torm didn't smile, but his next nod was slow and final. He pressed one last key. A wide alert spread across all drone nodes. Directive Alpha, initialized. Prepare Neptune approach path. Ern stepped away from the console. We've shown them silence, he said. Next, we show them scale. 17 hours, Holt said, squinting into the brightness of the heads-up map. That blockade locks, we lose Sol. Admiral Jern didn't reply immediately. He stood near the forward sensor rail, watching the Neptune arc on the orbital panel. The planet rotated beneath them, layered blue storms spinning slow and thick. The gravity wells around its equator distorted by decades of abandoned mining operations and slingshot launches. Nothing stable, nothing forgiving. Behind Neptune's trailing edge, a shadowed cluster drifted silently, 9,200 drones, gliding in coordinated arcs, each movement staggered milliseconds apart to avoid predictable formations. They didn't pulse like normal ships. Their thermal profiles barely registered. Their signal trails were layered with false data packets meant to mislead rather than conceal. Jern lowered his head slightly. Seal hatches, sync burn vectors to the second decimal. This run doesn't allow a single misalignment. Across solar ages, crewmen rushed to stations. Gloves snapped tight against sleeves. Control arms retracted into shock cages. Diagnostic pings echoed against reinforced glass panels. There was no room left for fear, just calibration. Holt dragged 2 fingers across the swarm map, triggering the AI's predictive logic overlay. The image fractured. Dozens of red projections rippled outward, simulating thousands of phantom ships in staggered trajectories. Well-registered 20,000, Holt said. More if their analysts panic. Jern's eyes narrowed. Make sure they do. On Nexara station, buried inside a Tier 3 Zorathian analysis array, Specialist Grith's upper eyes blinked out of sequence as data surged into the processing slab. Fleet activity near Neptune had surged. Distorted emissions, gravimetric spike layering, inconsistent IFFs. He ran the telemetry 3 times, expecting a malfunction. Instead, each cycle spat out a new answer. 12,000 vassals, then 19, then a flagged anomaly marker. Griff's secondary tech turned. "Is that Earth's fleet?" "No," Griff said, stiffening. "It's something else. They're broadcasting 3 command trees at once. But no Concord signature tags, no declaration lines, no formation structure." "Exactly. At the center of it all, Solar Aegis, surrounded now by 800 manned vessels, each one patched, understaffed, and running with lower than standard charge reserves. Their torpedo racks weren't full. Several frigates still bore scar fractures from earlier raids. But all of them were locked into final positioning around the slingshot arc. The time for repairs had passed. The only thing left was trajectory. Down on the flight deck, Commander Gavrin Holt leaned over the mission coordinator rail. His voice was steady, but his teeth stayed clenched between orders. "Align burn calibration to orbital decay markers. Confirm all helms have planetary vector orientation. Final burn sync in 1 hour, 21 minutes. Techs nodded without speaking. Each knew one wrong arc and a ship would bounce too shallow. Burn off into the cold with no way back. Jern moved alone through the dim corridor that led to the comms isolation room. He keyed open the final door, stepped into the vacuum-sealed recording chamber, and sat. The light from the walls barely illuminated his face. In front of him, one lens, one trigger. He stared at it for 5 seconds, then tapped the record. "This message is to Earth," he said flatly. "If it reaches you, and I don't return, know this. We didn't disappear. We moved without asking." He paused, then exhaled once through his nose. "Billy took our voice out of the council. We brought 10,000 in return." He reached forward and shut the recording. In the control deck, Holt's voice returned, sharper this time. "Final flight vectors distributed. All vessels confirm slingshot lock." The overhead lights dimmed, and a red bar lit the primary axis. Outside, the swarm began to shift. Drones folded inward, then spread again, repeating the maneuver in hypnotic rhythm. Each pulse changed the Concorde's estimations. The real fleet looked bigger with every hour. "Command ship linked," Cyril called from the side panel. "Formation sync complete." Jern returned to the bridge, passing behind a technician who was muttering numbers under his breath, tracing reaction calculations on a screen with a grease pencil. Nothing they were doing had been run in any simulation. Everything here rode the edge of gravitational chaos. "Solar burst begins in 10, Holt said. "That's our cloak window." "Light the corridor," Jern replied. Neptune's flare cycle burst across the rear scope. Against the flood of radiation, the Terran swarm ignited. Not with light, with movement. 10,000 vessels slipped past Neptune's arc, moving as one stream across the pitch. Not a single ship blinked. Not one adjusted its course mid-slit. They did not broadcast. They did not ask permission. They fell forward like a current dragged them across the stars. From the Concorde's outer picket line, long-range sensor crews blinked in alarm. 4 systems received conflicting fleet counts. 2 failed to track IFF patterns. The Nexara command fleet scrambled to reallocate attention. Tactical AI on their side began pinging red-level threat overlays. Every few seconds, the phantom count increased. Back on Solar Aegis, Holt turned as the ship creaked under the gravitational pressure. "We're locked. Slingshot in motion." Jern placed a hand on the navigation rail. The ship shook once as its thrusters cut into the curve of the maneuver. The fleet leaned around Neptune, dragging reality with it. No warnings were sent. No ultimatums were declared. 10,000 ships curved around a forgotten orbit, engines darkened, weapons quiet, following gravity and signal disruption to the one place they had been barred from. "Nexara. They'll see us before they believe it," Holt said quietly. "By then," Jern answered, They'll already be surrounded. The first thing they saw wasn't a ship. It was a shape, broad, angular, rippling with interference arcs. Projected against the neck's Aran rings like a second shadow had peeled off from the dark side of the system and begun expanding. The Sarathian control towers caught it in fragments. Signal bounces flashed too quickly for complete resolution. Every attempt at clean targeting showed new entries, vessels where there had been nothing a moment before. 12,000 markers, then 18, then an overload message, scrawled across 3 tactical interfaces as the system failed to resolve ID trees. By the time the actual Terran fleet breached visual range, half the Concorde's outer sensors had blacked out from recursive bandwidth loops. Specialist Grith stared across the translucent display slab inside the Nexara command core. The screen jumped as more data collapsed into its own telemetry loops. The map had stopped being useful. Instead, it pulsed with unreadable overlays, blurs of supposed fleet tags, overlapping formation codes that made no logical sense. "There aren't that many ships," he muttered. "It's a projection, it has to be." His superior, Commander Vokal, didn't respond. The Sarathian officer leaned into the sensor array, mandibles twitching as the tactical filters reset again and again. "They've split vector patterns," Grith said, louder now. "Those aren't ships. Some are shadows, simulations. Look, these are duplicates." Vokal stepped back, his claws scraping the floor. "Then why can't we isolate them?" Outside, 10,000 Terran ships began to fan across Nexara's orbital plane. None broke formation, none transmitted intent. They moved in intervals, weaving through each other with the fluency of a single organism. From above, it looked like a net tightening across the sky. Back on Solar Aegis, Holt rotated the gravity lens module with 2 fingers. His team watched the overlays ripple through the Concorde feed intercepts. 300 false mass signatures layered around the outer orbit. They weren't meant to trick visuals. They were meant to confuse force projection models, targeting grids, and enemy response simulations. "They're trying to track what doesn't exist," Holt said, turning to Jern. "We've got them second-guessing their own sensors." Jern leaned over the side rail, watching the actual ship movement cascade through the operational map. "What's their fleet posture?" "Fracturing. 1,500 have peeled toward what they believe is a flanking push. They're chasing ghosts. They'll feel the mistake before they understand it." At that moment, the Terran drone swarm initiated pulse pattern Theta. Every 7th drone emitted a low-band pulse staggered across 12 frequencies. To the Concorde's long-range sensors, it looked like a sudden acceleration, an impending charge from 20 directions. Their formations warped again, retreating from outer cover toward clustered defense belts. Holt adjusted the overlay. "They've lost their anchor ships," he said. "They can't figure out who's commanding what." Aboard the Central Concorde flagship Threxel Verge, Admiral Corin Nesh, one of the oldest surviving command tacticians in the Concorde, slammed a bald digit against the main display. "These signals are falsified," he roared. "No fleet maneuvers like this. No human fleet. They don't have the systems." A junior officer turned to him, scales slick with sweat. "They're bypassing our tactical prediction layers." "Then remove them," Nesh snapped. "We can't. Every counter sequence is being overwritten before the model finishes loading." On the lower deck of Solar Aegis, Jern entered the auxiliary broadcast chamber. No ceremony, no prelude, just a data relay and a single line of signal compression routed directly to the Concorde's open emergency channel. He lifted the comm device, turned once to the camera, and spoke. "Earth never left," he said calmly. "We simply let you speak first." Then he ended the transmission. Within seconds, the message echoed across every Concorde channel on the Nexara bandwidth. It repeated twice, then encrypted itself into a corruption loop that caused playback lag across half their internal systems. "Back on Nexara station," Vokal hissed. "What was that? What did he mean?" Grith stared at the sensor readouts. "He meant this isn't a demonstration, it's a position." Conquered ships closest to Nexara began shifting to defensive stances, but their formations overlapped with the flanking groups that had chased the Phantom fleets. Within minutes, 38 ships had crossed weapons lock with each other, not from Terran fire, but from conquered disarray. "Are we engaging?" one of the sensor techs asked on the Concorde's bridge. Nesh shook his head slowly. "We're not at war." "It may not matter," came the reply. Meanwhile, Holt turned from the primary rail to face Jern as he re-entered the deck. "They're scrambling for a coherent response," Holt said. Jern's voice dropped. "That means they're not commanding, they're reacting." The drones held formation, encircling Nexara like the iris of a single mechanical eye. Their signal masks continued to rotate, bouncing emissions between each other. The effect made it impossible to distinguish which ship led, which ship followed, or even how many actually existed. "Sensor fusion still holding," Holt confirmed. "They're seeing 20,000. Jiren closed his eyes for a moment. "Make them believe we brought 30. All around Nexara, the orbit shifted. Not physically, but tactically. The Concorde had lost central command cohesion. 2 more fleets turned toward new Phantom vectors, leaving the station exposed on its northern arc. The Terran fleet hadn't fired a single weapon, but the enemy had already started breaking apart. The swarm dropped first. 3,000 drones accelerated without warning, folding through local micro-jumps to bypass the Nexaron defense grid. They didn't form lines. They didn't broadcast. They struck in converging arcs, like spears hurled from 10,000 kilometers out. Nexara's orbital station tried to respond. Cannons tracked blurs they couldn't lock. Shields flared under pressure points too narrowly targeted to distribute energy. The first kinetic impacts hit the station's northern lattice, darts shaped like serrated harpoons, each one fired from a drone and driven by a gravitational coil that compressed mass before release. The impacts didn't explode. They caved, entire decks folded inward, bulkhead seams splitting like baked crust under sudden weight. In the command deck of Solar Aegis, Admiral Jern stood unflinching. Heat warnings flared across half the displays as return fire lit the outer ring. Concorde particle arrays lit up from the station's dorsal batteries, white arcs flinging across space toward the center of the incoming Terran fleet. "Bring Aegis forward," Jern ordered. 400 to spear point, no break in formation. Across the deck, Holt coordinated drone cluster S7 to shift trajectory. Their maneuver wouldn't block the station, it would confuse it. Each cluster weaved around the next, swapping identification markers mid-spin, forcing Nexara's automated targeting to recalibrate twice per second. "Charging banks 2 through 6, Sorel shouted. "Kinetics aligned, range optimal." The first return blast from Nexara raked Solar Aegis from bow to port side. The impact knocked Jern sideways. He slammed against the bulkhead rail, then dropped hard onto the floor, arm twisted beneath him. Holt reached him too late to stop the bleeding. Half the forearm had been shredded by fractured shrapnel, synthetic fibers torn away to reveal tendon and bone. Jern's eyes didn't move from the screen. "I need a tourniquet," he said through gritted teeth. Holt ripped a cable from the console's housing and wrapped it around the wound, tying it off with a grip so tight it made Jern's breath stop mid-chest. A crewman ran in with a med injector, but Jern waved him away. "It's still here," he muttered. "Still giving orders." Aegis kept charging. The lead strike group hit Nexara's outer ventral bay at nearly full velocity. Kinetic penetrators, shaped from cold-forged tungsten alloy wrapped in fractal-stabilized sheaths, stabbed through the thermal shielding and kept going. One crashed into the station's vent systems, turning the internal exhaust channel into a superheated furnace. Steam ruptured behind containment glass. Another dart fractured a guidance array and sent its feedback loop spiraling through the Concorde's communications feed. In the chaos, Holt executed Operation Shard. The drone reserve, previously held in strict formation, scattered in randomized vectors. Half the Concorde fleet split again, this time trying to encircle the wrong half of the Terran spread. Internal orders from Nexara Command overlapped, breaking sequence. "Now," Holt barked. "Drop Phase 3. Focus drone fire on deck seams." A new volley of impacts triggered in unison. The drones adjusted mid-flight and struck Nexara's rotating rings. Structural weak points between the command deck and external shield housing. Explosions weren't necessary. Each strike opened fractures across the station's ribbed infrastructure, like hairline breaks in ceramic under thermal shock. Inside Nixara, Admiral Nesh staggered as his command center lurched sideways. Lights dimmed and emergency pressure shields dropped around the control banks. 2 officers were pinned beneath a collapsed conduit panel. Nesh staggered forward. "Where is their flagship?" His technician coughed, mouth bleeding. "Aegis, their front. Fire on it." "We can't. Coordinates reset with every pulse. They're bouncing signals between decoy vessels." Nesh turned to the visual feed. Dozens of Terran ships now filled the lower arc of orbit. None of them wavered. Even the ones absorbing hits kept course. The swarm hadn't broken. The net was still closing. Aboard Solar Aegis, Holt rotated the secondary rail and leaned over to Jaren, who sat in a reinforced seat, blood still drying on his shoulder. "We found the shield core," Holt said. "They've buried it beneath the secondary coolant deck. We've got one clean shot, if we time the push with the shield cycle reset." Jern didn't blink. "Line up every remaining kinetic pod. I want saturation fire until the insulation casing gives. It'll burn half the drones. They'll die without firing if we delay." Holt turned back to his terminal and issued the full fire stream order. Cluster C9 peeled from the swarm and loaded their remaining darts into forward cannons. Each drone adjusted its angle manually. Micro-realignments passed through the neural net like a falling series of dominoes. At once, 200 launched. The shield rippled as expected, then cracked. A silent wave of fractures spread across Nixara's outer core. Cooling tanks vented raw gas into the atmosphere, spinning ice crystals into a storm of drifting frost. Within the breach, heat built fast, an internal reactor scrambling to reroute power it could no longer contain. "Another volley," Jern whispered. "Push through before they think." More drones launched. The final kinetic impact struck the main column beneath the station's command hub. The impact didn't collapse it. It shattered the framework into hundreds of load-bearing faults. The entire dorsal segment of Nixara sagged under its own weight, slanting downward. Inside the station, alarms finally triggered. Not for incoming fire, for reactor imbalance. Nesh turned to his remaining aide, blinking against the rising heat. "Do we have external override?" The aide barely choked out the answer. "Gone. Other ramps destroyed." On the Solar Aegis, Holt watched Nixara's shielding stutter and vanish. Drone data confirmed hull breach across decks 12 through 19. "We have the core," he said. Jern gave the final nod. "Then finish it." Static ripped through Concord's emergency channel. Then, suddenly, clarity. "This is High Executive Valthor. All fleets stand down. Nixara is compromised. Cease engagement. Prepare for diplomatic transition of control. Full de-escalation protocol, effective immediately." The message repeated, this time with biometric seals embedded, 6-tone authentication. Zerothian organ pitch, retinal flare code. Everything matched, every signature aligned. Across 3 sectors, 1,800 Concord ships received the transmission within seconds. They stopped mid-burn, veering off active trajectories. Formation nets faltered. Missiles already in flight were redirected toward empty space. Several captains stared at the embedded command key, looping beneath the broadcast, greenlit with the executor's verified signature. But Valthor hadn't surrendered. Inside the fractured remains of Nexara's core command tier, Valthor was screaming into an inactive relay, tail wrapped around a shattered input rail. Plasma burns covered the left side of his face. Blood pooled under the access hatch. The central command AI had shut him out of primary controls. When he slammed his claw against the interface for the 6th time, it only responded with, "Command privileges revoked." He turned to his second, eyes wide with disbelief. "He forged me?" Commander Tharn blinked slowly, the realization dawning with visible horror. "The broadcast. It was you, in every layer. Voice print, organ pulse, even your motion ticks. They didn't mimic," Valthor growled. "They dissected." And up on Solar Aegis, Holt leaned over the transmitter bank, pulse lamp fading on his interface. The biometrics had been harvested weeks ago, spliced from open Senate debates, cross-referenced through training footage. layered with enough variable distortion to pass every Concord encryption filter. "He's talking to ghosts now," Holt said, watching the collapse unfold. "And the ones who still trust him are flying blind." Jern, still seated from the blood loss, nodded slowly. "How long until they confirm it was fake?" "Too late," Holt replied. "Retreat already rippled through half the command tree. They'll spend the next hour arguing if it's real, and by then, we'll be inside their weapons systems." Drone Cluster A5 dropped into Nixara's breached docking arc, disabling the outer hangar grid with a single directed EMP spike. Aegis followed seconds later, its escort ships sweeping into the perimeter like wolves into a butcher's yard. No defensive fire greeted them. Inside the remains of the Concord's weapons relay, 3 officers attempted a manual override of the station's orbital arrays. The console spat sparks after a drone charge sliced its relay core. The override lights flicked red. Their firepower was offline. On the Terran command deck, Holt turned to Jern again. "Balthor's internal comm feed is still broadcasting through residual Concord relay. You want to end it yourself?" Jern raised his remaining hand toward the panel. "No. I want him to watch." Holt pulled open a restricted channel. Buried inside the Concord's own council archives, a data wedge was uploaded. Not a virus, not sabotage. A document. 6 pages long, authored, encrypted, and now live across the Senate's master index. Title: Terran Union, Sovereign Power. Attached: the Declaration of Earth's Authority, authored by the very council that voted it out. Rewritten, signed, backdated, embedded into the historical log server. "Overwrite complete," Holt said. A new command signature appeared across the Nexaran data backbone. In bold green font, one line blinked. "Earth's overing is not up for vote." Back inside the battered command deck, Balthor screamed. He thrashed across broken glass, clawing at the ruined interface. The static image of his own forged broadcast kept looping beside him, his own voice used as the blade. Thorn backed away. "Your fleets are leaving." "I didn't surrender," Balthor gasped. "You didn't have to. They heard it anyway." Concord's external observers began transmitting retreat confirmations. Outposts near Gliza and Verdix sent encrypted updates that contact with Central Command had dropped. 16 Zorathian captains confirmed receipt of Balthor's voice. 3 of them had already offered ceasefire handshakes to Terran scout ships. "Shipboard AI estimates 68% strategic withdrawal from remaining Concord units," Holt confirmed, eyes flicking between feeds. "Remaining assets either stalled or broken. We're not facing a fleet anymore." The Aegis drifted closer to the station's orbital path. Fire still bloomed across its central ring. Drones buzzed through open hatches. Reactor heat levels hovered near redline. Jern looked past the static on the display wall. Nixara's silhouette filled the forward panel. He watched the hull drift downward. Part of its superstructure cracked open like torn armor. "Lock targeting on their comms core," he ordered. "No need to destroy it, just cut the signal." Within seconds, 2 drones struck the broadcast array. The entire upper antenna ring snapped loose. One half spiraled into the drift. The other collapsed inward. Balthor's last internal feed flickered, then went dark. Onboard solar Aegis, Holt turned to the room. "Command confirms, Nexara is done. The Council has lost central control." He looked back to Jern. "It's over." Jern didn't smile, but his gaze stayed locked on the shattered ring of the station. "Not yet," he said. "Signal all ships. Begin lockdown formation. Any Concord ship still lingering gets marked and tracked." "And Balthor?" Jern inhaled once. His arm still hung in a brace. The blood hadn't dried fully. The pain had never left. He stared at the blank panel. "Secure him. Don't kill him. Let him watch the vote get reversed from a cage." Balthor sat alone. The reinforced holding cell aboard Solar Aegis was cold by design, its lighting deliberately uneven, flickering in a way that disoriented most Zorathian optics. He hadn't spoken in hours. There was no one left to answer his orders. No fleet responding to his encrypted keys. No council platform acknowledging his presence. Only the Terran internal relay screen remained active across from him. It displayed a still image, Earth's seal now embedded at the center of the Concord emblem, surrounded by a new arc of stars. 15 systems, now 17. The broadcast looped quietly. A voice read the declaration aloud. By full acknowledgement of strategic sovereignty, deterrent capacity, and sustained autonomy, Earth is hereby reinstated into the Concord. He looked away. Up on the command deck, Admiral Korath Jern sat with a support strap wrapped across his chest. His right arm was gone, replaced by a rigid exo-frem bracket for later prosthetic integration. A medical officer had offered to numb the pain. He refused. He stood as the message from the Concord arrived. A signed transmission from 3 former core systems chairs, each stating Earth's reinstatement was voluntary and unanimous. Commander Holt raised an eyebrow as he read the header. They're calling it unanimous? They'll lie faster than they surrender, Jern muttered. Holt tapped the screen again. 2 border systems granted in full, complete trade concessions, and control of the orbital lanes around Nexara for the next cycle rotation. Jern didn't celebrate. He adjusted the chair forward and leaned toward the ship-wide comm line. Broadcast me, he said. The light blinked green. This is High Admiral Jern of the Terran Union, he began. As of now, Earth resumes full standing, not because they permitted it, but because we arrived with quorum of our own. He cut the signal before adding anything else. The rest had already been written in wreckage. Within days, the Zorathian League began unraveling. Subspecies once forced under Valthor's central mandate declared internal elections. A dozen civil skirmishes broke out across fringe colonies. Autonomous provinces severed from the League's command net, seeking Terran diplomatic channels. Their trust came slow, but it came. Back home, Earth received its returning fleet with more silence than ceremony. The people had followed every intercepted battle feed, every clipped transmission, every forged surrender. No one needed to explain what had happened. They already knew. Mars Colony held the first service. A circular wall now stood beneath the main observatory platform, etched with names. Each one belonged to someone who hadn't returned. Crews lost in decoy runs, pilots buried in broken ships, technicians burned alive inside compromised drone cores. The final count sat at 8,300. Jern walked the inner ring slowly, left arm fixed in a new brace. Holt walked beside him, hands behind his back. Names feel heavier than the numbers, Holt said. Dame always do, Jern answered. The 2 men stopped before a new flag raised behind the monument. The Terran standard had been adjusted. 2 additional stars woven into the arc above Sol. Vega's second colony and the outer system of Indrix. The 2 systems granted as reparations. These people could have accepted our place, Holt said. Instead, they built a trap and called it politics. People built a cage and assumed we'd never bring tools. At the far end of the plaza, the viewing gallery housed something newer. It stood upright, encased in high-tension crystal. A drone. One of the originals from Cascade Node. Its hull was fractured, scuffed, blackened at the edges from repeated microjumps. A child stared up at it, hands pressed to the transparent panel. He couldn't have been more than 10. No military stripes on his clothes, just a school tag on his collar. His eyes scanned the placard beneath the drone. When Earth stood alone, we didn't whisper. We arrived. Behind him, tourists passed in quiet groups. No one touched the walls. No one needed to. Inside a quiet chamber deep beneath the Mars Military Archive, Holt stood beside the last active terminal linked to the stellar Cascade network. Its nodes had already gone cold. The final override command blinked, waiting for execution. Jern stood nearby, watching the readout. No need to keep it running, Holt said. We may need it again, Jern replied. If we do, then it won't be quiet next time. Jern considered that, then gave the nod. Holt input the final command. The screen dimmed. All subnodes began to decommission. Drone yards across the Kuiper arc shut down silently. Engines offline, arms retracted, cores depressurized. It ended not with a flash, but with a blank screen. Outside, the galaxy shifted. The Concorde still existed, but its center had tilted. No species forgot what 10,000 unannounced ships had done to their command hierarchy. No analyst failed to revise Earth's capabilities. Treaties were redrafted, engagement doctrines rewritten, education modules updated, and every child learning interstellar history memorized one line. Earth wasn't removed. Earth responded. AHFY fans, if this story hit hard, you know what to do. Subscribe for more brutal tactics, cold vengeance, and the kind of earned victories that make you proud to be human. Drop a comment. What would you have done if you stood where Jern did? And don't forget to share this with someone who still thinks Earth needs permission to speak. Because in these stories, Earth doesn't return to the table. It flips it.